Welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Stuckrath, dietary needs expert, certified meetings manager, certified food protection manager. I have searched the globe to find people and businesses who are creating safe, sustainable, and inclusive food and beverage experiences for their employees, guests, and communities. In each episode, you will find authentic conversations about how food and beverage impacts inclusion, sustainability, culture, community, health, and wellness. I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to cover it all. Are you ready to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line? If so, let's go. Jennifer's going to join me in just a second, Jennifer Johnson, and we're going to have our conversation here. She is a third-party event planner based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she has worked in both association and agency staff. She has had her own agency since 2008. And menu planning is one of her favorite aspects of planning events. She has worked with a lot of international groups and she's become accustomed to specific dietary needs. Jennifer, as I introduced Jennifer, she's a third-party event planner. But in my promotion, I also said that Jennifer has got Hashimoto's disease. She's manages gluten intolerance, and she cannot have raw cruciferous vegetables. So think of crudité. Jennifer can't eat that. And we got a big...
can't eat most salads.
Okay. I posted in the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group that, a couple of weeks ago saying, hey, if you want to be a guest, especially if you have a dietary need. And you piped in with the fact that you have the Hashimoto's, the gluten intolerance, and you basically have an oral allergy syndrome to those vegetables. And
well, it's all tied to the Hashimoto's disease.
Okay.
So I can eat most anything. I refer to myself as a billy goat. And Hashimoto's is a spinoff of hyperthyroidism.
Okay.
And a few years ago, they found a node on my thyroid as part of as a result of my Hashimoto's. And so the gluten intolerance is I can eat gluten, but if I eat a lot of gluten, my node inflames. And so then I get a pressure. If you know where your thyroid is, right between your clavicle bone or right at the base of your throat with your clavicle.
Okay.
I get this terrible pressure and it doesn't hurt. It's just really uncomfortable. It feels like I want to cough all the time or clear my throat all the time. And it's just this pressure. And I had it for a couple of years before I went to an endocrinologist and it was successfully identified as a node. The raw cruciferous vegetables, it's the amount of iodine that are in those as a food. And again, that inflames the thyroid because my thyroid just doesn't work properly. So, it has all kinds of great side effects. I have no eyebrows anymore. I have to draw those on a daily basis. Super exciting. But it really made me much more sensitive to people who have food intolerances and specific medical dietary restrictions because now I'm living it. Always had utmost respect for vegetarians and vegans. I certainly understand kosher and halal. I get celiac disease and gluten-free, but then when people started with and I understand seafood allergies, especially shellfish, but when people were like, oh, I'm allergic to strawberries, I was like, yeah, really? Are you strawberries or pineapple? Or, and I was like, okay, I'll take that with a grain of salt. I'll try not to do anything that has strawberries in it, but maybe beside it or on a side plate or what have you. So it's made me much more sensitive to it. I've always been, with the groups of dietary needs. Yeah. I think I told you I worked with a large Indian company for a number of years, and a Hindu vegetarian is not like a regular vegetarian.
Right.
And they don't necessarily agree with the Mediterranean. Well, they'll agree with the Mediterranean palate. They won't agree with the Italian palate.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it really is. They don't like mushrooms.
I don't like mushrooms with either.
My experience with the group that I worked with, when I was like, "Ooh, yeah, okay, we'll do a great portobello steak." Nope, don't. Mushrooms not our thing. Okay, so yeah, so it was interesting.
That is interesting, and okay. So I don't know if we want to get into that story a little bit more now, but I thought that because I ask you, so everybody, I ask my guests some questions before they come on, so I have some context, to where they're coming from. And one of them was a negatively do you have an example of a situation that negatively affected your group's food and beverage experience? And so, Jennifer, that was part of it, right?
Yeah, it was part of it. It was the same company. We were doing a meeting up in Boston in the winter time, and so this particular group always likes to have a soup, and tomato soup was what's not more universally accepted than that. And so I'm talking to the chef, and I was like, vegetarian, and he said yes. I said, so tomato soup is vegetarian? He said, absolutely. I said, so you don't use chicken broth? Stopped him in his tracks. I'm talking to the chef.
Yep.
And so he's thinking he's making a vegetarian soup with a chicken broth based. And when you were dealing with a true vegetarian, or, in the case of this company with a lot of Hindu vegetarians, that was sort of a philosophical thing. They
right.
don't want anything with eyes but potatoes. So, it was, because here we go. He's preparing soup that morning for 300 people, tomato soup. And I'm like, and that is vegetarian. And there is no chicken broth. And we'd had this conversation in the pre-con meeting, and we'd had this conversation in the menu planning. And so all of that was not trickling down from the convention services manager I was working with. And this was a major brand, higher end box hotel. It's not what I would have expected from a brand that's really noted for being one of the leaders, one of the big box hotels in dietary considerations.
Right. Yeah.
So there was a lot of scrambling, and I finally found a kitchen utility in the kitchen who was Hindu, and I was like, I need you to help me because I have 300 people, and of those 300 people, 62% are Hindu vegetarian.
Wow.
So it was a big pivot.
So it was one of the staffers in the hotel that was Hindu vegetarian.
Yes, who was able to help us and help the chef understand the difference, the nuances.
Right.
That's what it were nuances.
Well, I hope that person got a bonus.
Well, they got a really big tip from me with a client group that didn't do typically a lot of tips.
Wow. That's awesome for that person, because, and that's where I think we have to rely on a lot of our network and, and asking the questions of our culinary team is first and foremost, but also asking of our attendees too, saying, hey, we might need your help with this, or going outside of our culinary team and bringing somebody in that case.
Yeah. And, this same group, we actually famously did a meeting at a Disney-owned property in Orlando and at one of the Universal hotels in Orlando in back-to-back years, and they allowed them to bring a chef over from India to consult with the hotel kitchen.
Wow, that's awesome.
Well, it tells you about the spend of the meeting.
Right.
They were allowed to do that. But, and they were brought in as a consulting basis, and they were from, I think one year it was a Four Seasons hotel, and I think the other year it was an Oberoi hotel where the chef came from. So, very high-end chefs. But that was something that the client team wanted to do because they really wanted to give their 1,100 attendees an authentic experience. And this was a customer meeting and IT services. And so they really did want to, yes, we're going to use your standard hotel menus, but we're going to supplement them and bring our culture into the meeting. It's something that is very much part of the culture of the company to share where they come from. And it was really, it's always very special and neat, but, sometimes it's an education process, especially if that group is having an internal meeting in the U.S.
Right.
The kitchen will do some Indian style food for you, but this is not an Indian kitchen. And a lot of times I'm just like, and when we're doing the big party, just do yourselves a favor and bring in a catering partner from outside. Like you see with a lot of Hindu weddings and different
venues.
So,
and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes, the kitchen can't be everything to everybody. It's, it's like I famously did a meeting at a hotel in the Low Country in South Carolina, and it was an international group. It was only 110 people, but it was an international group. And so, I had to have a big conversation with the kitchen about they really want to see me. She just showed me her camera with my name on her phone and made me laugh. But I had to explained to the kitchen that, this group wanted to see a variety of sort of hard breads in the mornings. They wanted sliced cucumbers in the mornings, and, if they had any pickled fish, because I had a lot of Northern Europeans, and, it was just sort of like,
Yep.
This is crazy. And I just want to say to the audience, you will have to forgive me. Normally this would not be an issue, and I would be on StreamYard with Tracy. However, I actually have work, and I'm in a client's office today, and for some reason my computer's acting up, and that's why I don't have my headphones and I can't pivot and be on screen with everybody. But yay for having work.
That's very true. And this is working because from Nancy can hear you. You can see yourself on camera when I show the phone, and I could just do that like that. There we go.
So it works.
It works.
That's
Yeah.
what we do as planners. We shift.
We do shift. There we go. You're right there next to me. How's that?
Yep.
Okay. So, I think that one of the things that you just said that I pull out of that is that you really do need to know your attendee base, and you need to know your client. And because you're designing food and beverage, you're bringing these people together. You want them to bond over the food and beverage, and you want to make sure that it's right. So I think it's awesome that you do that. There was another story that you gave me, and I'm going to call it out because Nancy actually works for Rizzo.
Oh,
And,
okay.
So I was like, please listen to us. So, what the question that I asked, is what is your best experience with a venue when identifying food items? So it was the Rizzo Center, right?
Yeah. So the Rizzo Conference Center, which is owned by the Keenan Flagler School of Business at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, which technically is in Durham, the next city over. It's kind of a nuance. But to me, they are the gold standard on the way they do their buffets and they identify their food, because it doesn't say, it doesn't, as an example, if they put a salad up there and it's got everything in it, it doesn't say doesn't contain nuts. It says it does contain nuts. It does contain soy. It does contain egg. It does contain dairy. And they tell you what it does contain. And so most people, and I have a group that we do have a fairly high percentage of dietary needs at them. And I don't have to drill down with the Rizzo so much because they identify everybody. Now, if I have some, I have somebody who is gluten-free, and when somebody is gluten-free, my first question to them is, do you have celiac disease? Because there's a difference, and because I don't want somebody to go into anaphylactic shock if they get around gluten. So I almost want to treat them like I would a kosher meal, and that it's almost a separate plate. I get real involved with the kitchen on that one, and sometimes I'll bring in the attendee into the conversation depending on what their interest is. But really, the Rizzo is the gold standard, and they do, because they're a conference center and they're affiliated with a university who has a medical school and a nutrition program, and I'm sure that's part of it too. They have very, very balanced food offerings. You can go and you can get your mashed potatoes if you want your mashed potatoes, but you can also get quinoa on the same buffet, and it's what works for everybody. And if you ever are looking for a small to mid-sized conference center, providing a per day complete meeting package, and you need to be in North Carolina or the Southeast, and dietary is a thing, Rizzo is amazing. Like I said, to me, they're the gold standard. We're very fortunate in our market. I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina, and in our Greater Research Triangle Park market, we have several hotels that are really, really good about it. And I think part of the reason is because we have the 3 research universities, we have a lot of international businesses in the market, and so we have a pretty diverse international population, and I think that feeds into what's going on. So
exactly.
Rizzo Center, shout out big time.
Big time. Well, and Apple is about to bring a big, huge facility to the area as well. So that's going to add, I think that was adding 3,000 jobs. So
yeah. And like the Indian IT services company that I was telling you about sits in Cary, which is a suburb of Raleigh.
Right.
And they have I think 4,000 seats in the area. So yeah.
So go ahead.
No, I'm done.
I mean, I love that shout out to Rizzo. But going back to that point, if you guys are members of the Eating at a Meeting Facebook group, you will see I posted some pictures of an event that I went to last week, and I don't call names out, but they listed that it was free of gluten, or it was dairy. So it was gluten free, or it was dairy free. They did not list contains nuts or contains this. And so to me, that is the biggest challenge, because how do I know if it has that or not?
Right.
My teaching is that you do that for the top 9 allergens, as well as any allergens that one of your attendees might have, like it has garlic or it has eggplant or something like that. But you don't need to do the full breadth of it, but definitely focus on the top 9 and what your attendees have had. And Jennifer, I do want to say one thing. Individuals who have celiac disease are not going to go into anaphylactic shock. That is actually
I was afraid of it.
Yeah, that is actually for food allergies. And so celiac is actually a digestive, an autoimmune disease that wreaks havoc on the small intestine. It will pretty much destroy the small intestine. Destroy the villi in the small intestine. So it's a different reaction, but it could put somebody in the hospital. It could put somebody in the room for the next 5 days, debilitate them completely. So, but that is the big difference on that. One of the things that we were chatting about before the show was that the managing food and beverages is not, it was like, what is the biggest pet peeve about, or what do you wish people knew about what we do as event planners? And I think goes across the board. It's not always fun and glamorous and exciting. I mean, on your website, you say the minutia. It is minutia for sure. And that really comes into play when you're talking about food allergies and managing the menus as well.
Well, exactly. It's, it is, because nothing is going to be, for example, let's say you have a large number of people who are attending your meeting who are gluten-free, and you share with the kitchen that. So they say, okay, well, we can do a gluten-free bread, and that gluten-free bread, let's say they're going to use almond flour. Well, what if you have somebody with a serious nut allergy, a tree nut allergy,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're having bread made with almond flour? So, and they didn't share that with you. I mean, you really have to be thoughtful on how you solicit the information from your attendees on what their dietary needs are, because everybody's going to have something, or not everybody, but, more than you can handle are going to have something. And, that's where you have to start to draw the line. And in my case, a dietary restriction is either fed off of a medical condition, an allergy, or, religious.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Philosophical.
Exactly.
And, so if somebody says to me, well, I'm on Atkins diet, good for you, take off the bread.
Right.
Because at some point everybody is grown up and you have to take ownership for yourself. And if somebody has a really complicated situation like me, I'll reach out to the hotel directly when I'm an attendee sometimes. And I'll just say, listen, this is what I have. I can eat around most things. If you can, if I could see the menus in advance,
right,
I'll know if I have a problem coming.
Yep.
And, like you, I travel with some snacks on my own, but I'm also really like you, because I'm a member of the Delta Sky Club.
Yep.
And they're always very good to have things in there that people like us can usually eat. Thank God for the boiled egg.
Yes.
So
I've eaten many of there.
But it's all about communication, which is so much of the job that we do on every front. But I really feel like, trying to manhandle box lunches for dietary restrictions, that's the world's biggest nightmare. And, I got vegetarians and I have this and I have that. And they're like, okay, egg salad sandwiches. I was like, yeah, but we just did boiled eggs. So no, not egg salad sandwiches. I mean, and this was in Arizona and it was hot, so egg salad sandwiches weren't gross. But, it's sort of like when you have to plan to the lowest common denominator, sometimes it can become very, very challenging. And people take it personally. Everybody wants to be heard. Everybody wants to be accounted for. And sometimes the the need and the desire to be inclusion can so be outweighed by the challenges of including everybody. And, because the kitchen, not every kitchen is set up to do things like that. And sometimes, look at meetings today, look at all these beautiful corporate campuses and say, okay, we're staying at a select service hotel because everybody gets a bigger room and the Wi-Fi is free and this, that, and the other. But then when I have to do a dinner and I have the select service hotel to do a dinner with, I can't do a dinner that can accommodate 17 different dietary restrictions easily. So, it's creativity, it's communication, it's thoughtfulness.
And I wholeheartedly agree. And so providing your dietary needs up front totally helps you and I when we're planning these menus, but it really depends on, if you're at a big box corporate hotel or if you're at a franchise. And, there's somebody that made a comment that, well, if you go to all these big boxes, they're trained. And I'm like, well, no, they're not, because they may carry that brand name, but they're owned by Jennifer and they're managed by Tracy. And the training provided by those whoever the management or the ownership is going to be different than the big box. And, and so it's nice to find the big boxes that do have the chefs that are trained. Not necessarily all of them are, but, but switching gears and going to another one, it's really, that's where it comes in talking about it in your RFP and talking about it, on your site visits, or what are your capabilities, and knowing the history of your group.
It is. And what I have learned that has become a really important thing for me, I have a medical group that meets every other year, and lots of dietary restrictions. And the biggest problem is I have a pretty high percentage of vegan and a pretty high percentage of gluten-free. And those two do not hold hands well together when you're planning a menu. Mm-mm. And so I have learned to ask my hotel for references of other groups that have a lot of dietary needs.
That's a great idea.
I get on the phone with the planner and I'm like, how were they? Were they reasonable? Could you work with them? Did you have to spoon feed it to them? Did you have to pull teeth to get them to help you out? I mean, what are you doing?
You should also ask, is it the same chef?
Yeah, exactly. Is it the same chef? And, a lot of times it's a culture. And, I've been known to go to the food and beverage director on menu planning in the past and just say, I'm not getting what I'm needing from your team. I'm sorry to be that person, but, it starts with you. And if your chef, I'm not trying to ruin your chef's menus and his sensibilities, but at the same time, I've got people I got to feed and, they're paying a lot of money to attend this conference. And so they've got to have something to sustain them.
Right.
And, I see this trend from some organizations where they're sending people like me who know raw cruciferous and gluten aware. I mean, that's a chef can deal with that if they know that that's what's going on. And I have to say, it's not going to make me die or super sick or anything. It will just make me a little uncomfortable.
Right.
And, but 5 days of uncomfortable can lead up to I'm not really there and present.
You're not.
Doing what I need to do. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of groups are now starting to send me directly to the hotel or people like me to the hotel to say, hey, I'm going to be a guest at this meeting and these are my dietary restrictions and how can you help me?
But you have to have, the meeting planner has to have that conversation to make sure the chef is okay with that as well, because some chefs are like, nope, stay away from me.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's happening or not, but it's, I just can't imagine redirecting a meeting attendee unless it was something I was really uncomfortable with.
Right. Yeah. And there was one group that I heard, it was a couple of years ago, and they actually had a chat with the chef. So they worked it out so that anybody who had a specific one was actually directed there, and it worked out great. But it is, sharing the menus in advance, talking to the ones that have, a longer list or a variety of needs to make sure that there's something accommodated. And a lot of, and actually I went to an event recently and they showed me, I'm like, she's like, are you still on is this dietary card that we have for you still viable? And it was one that I created 10 years ago. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that you still have this. But it was, but on the left-hand side, I had this is what I can't eat. And with the yeast allergy, it's no yeast, sugar, vinegar, dairy, gluten. It's a long list.
Right.
But on the right-hand side, I said, this is what I can have and this is what I enjoy, right? And I remember going to a 10-course meal at a restaurant. It was an author dinner. And I said, can I do this? And they're like, yep, come on. And that chef I need to reach out to him. He came up to me and he's like, Tracy, I've made 9 copies of that and I put it all over the restaurant. So every time I was making one of the 9 dishes, I knew what I could make you. Right. And he goes, it was so much fun. And not every chef is going to be like that. But when you're an attendee, providing that information to your meeting planner in advance allows them to create that same experience.
Exactly. I mean, I was the planner for a state association meeting a couple of years ago at a hotel that I know well. It's one in Raleigh, and we were sitting there at the pre-con meeting, and Chef was there and all this other stuff. And my client stepped out of the room, and I said, okay, Chef, I said, I don't mean to be that person because this is right when we identified the issues that I had with the Hashimoto's. I said, this is what I can't eat, and this is my philosophy about it. And he said, okay. He said, and I said, and I plan the menu so I know what I can eat coming up. I was like, but tonight, he said, well, tonight here's your prep day. And he said, are you going to eat in a restaurant? And I said, no, I'm just going to order room service. He said, fine, give me an idea what time. And I said, okay. And he fixed me a plate and sent it to me. It was great. I didn't have to think about it. It was he's like, is there anything you don't really care for? And, I was like, well, I'm not big on deli meat, but that's just, I can eat it, but I'm just not big on it.
Right.
And, he just sent me the most fantastic turkey burger without a bun and a nice salad and all this other stuff. And he sent me the dressing and he told me what kind of dressing it was and that there was nothing that he didn't think he said everything should be fine for you. If not, just call us. And, but they also sent a little, set of vinegar and oil just in case I wanted to go that route. So I was just like, how thoughtful. And he's like, that was so easy. It took me 2 minutes. And he said, and all you had to do was tell me.
Right.
And I think that's what it is. And I think so many people, get their back up about, well, okay, I've got to do this. And so now I've gotten really thoughtful. I think I shared with you, it's sort of like dietary restrictions. And I sort of have, my big 6 or 7 that I look for. And then if I ask them about a specific food allergy, because I want to know about an allergen. And then if it's something else, then I make them write it out. And that's usually a person I reach out to personally and have a conversation with.
Yeah. Well, Shandy, who owns Certistar, it's an app that restaurants can use to upload their menus and attendees or guests can look at their menus. It's not for scratch kitchens and our event stuff. But and if you want to listen to my interview with her, it was episode 53 of the Eating at a Meeting podcast. But what she found, because she's a business person and she's got a shellfish allergy and pork and something else. But in her research for the company, the conversation around food allergies at a restaurant is 15 minutes on average, like 12 to 15 minutes. And when you're at a business meeting, and consider that an event as well, to have that conversation with a server, to try to get something, hey, I'm gluten-free, and the server looks at you dead in the face and says, I don't know what you're talking about, right? That 15-minute exchange takes away from that relationship building that you have at the event and or the business meeting. And you said it a few minutes ago, it's like, then you're not present. You've just spent a whole bunch of money. You're not absorbing the knowledge that you came for or making the connections because you're hangry or you're sick or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah. So it's really interesting. And she talks about how she goes into a restaurant an hour beforehand, before meetings, and says, this is what I want. This is my needs. And then she comes back and comes with her guests. I'm like, that shouldn't have to happen,
No, that's not sustainable.
Right.
You can't do that. And it's just sort of like, I mean, it's a lot of things.
It is.
So
now, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, I had a client one time when we were doing a meeting in Dallas, high-end meeting, 5-star property, and they would always do a sort of, it was a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday pattern. Arrivals on Friday evening or Wednesday evening with a reception. And then Thursday, we did a big splash dinner, something fun. And so we're in Dallas, and that's when the AT&T, the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, was brand new. And I said, and we were going over and doing a tour in the afternoon. I said, well, that's our off-site dinner. We need to stay and do dinner there. And, it was only 40 people. And they were like, well, and I was like, we can do one of the VIP suites, really super fancy. And the client was just like, no, we just don't see it. And again, international company, didn't get the whole football thing. And so then after we went to see it and they saw the way their attendees were like, oh my God, we're on the 50-yard line getting our photos taken, and we're doing a meet and greet with the Cowboy cheerleaders and blah, blah, blah. And he comes over to me, he says, I don't suppose there's a way we can set up dinner for tonight here, can we? And I was like, no, they needed that answer 12 weeks ago. And then we got your dietary, even if there was space, even if they could do it, it would probably be some pretty high-end wings and things like that, and that's not going to work for you. So, it's just trying to get the client's attention because,
right.
They're looking at so many other variables about content and, core objectives and all that other stuff. And that's why they hire people like us, because we're going to take care of the food. But,
right.
We got to have a conversation about it at some point where they are being thoughtful about what's going to work for their guests. And,
right.
A lot of times it's interesting, and it's not just food. Sometimes it's, if you're in a corporate group and they're in a non-regulated industry, because there are a few left, and they say, okay, we have all these C-suite guys coming in and we want a single malt scotch on the bar. If you want to challenge, go to a hotel and try to get them to understand that you want to put a single malt scotch on the bar.
Right.
Because they're like, well, we do Chivas, or we do Cutty Sark, or I was like, okay, listen, I want a single malt. Sing with the good stuff, the Glenfiddich, the Glenlivet, the Macallan, something like that, something that's 18 years old. And they're like, nobody ever does that. I said, I know, it's kind of fun, and let's do something special.
Yeah.
And so it's I don't often go to a hotel and look at the banquet menus and that's what I order. 9 times out of 10, I go off menu and do everything custom. And the kitchen enjoys that if they have the time and you have the budget.
Well, and then you're asking them more than 72 hours in advance, right? I mean, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So, and that goes with the dietary needs and things like that too, but it is pre-planning, and I will beat this till the day I'm die, but I mean, food and beverages are number one expenditure. And it's the thing that most planners spend the least amount of time on. And it can have such a big impact on your budget, as well as waste, but also on your attendee, engagement and
experience. Yeah,
experience.
Because let me tell you something. If the food is bad, that's what they're going to put on their survey. Exactly. They're not going to say, oh my God, you brought in Tracy from Thrive and she was the most awesome speaker we've ever heard. Or, we have Nancy Linderman from Rizzo and she's the most awesome speaker we've ever heard. No, they're going to say, well, I had a dietary restriction and that's, I'm gluten-free and you brought me lasagna. I'm a gluten-free vegetarian. You brought me meat lasagna. Thanks. Right. Mm-hmm. Or my food was cold or, whatever. It just,
well,
they're going to remember. So.
I had cold, we went to dinner last night and my parents and I, and the crab cake that they had did not look like the crab cake that we've been eating for 21 years. And it looked like it literally looked like it was one of those prepackaged crab cakes. And I asked the waitress and I said, did the recipe change? And she's like, no, it's the same. I'm like, I mean, I did. And no, it's not. And my corn on the cob was so cold. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to eat this. But that makes a lasting impression. And do I really want to go back there? Yeah.
It certainly does.
Yeah. So, there was one other thing that we were chatting about beforehand that I thought was interesting. Have you ever had an unreasonable request around dietary needs?
Well, define unreasonable. I had a gentleman who came one time and, I think he had 21 items listed that he was allergic to.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And, some of them were such bland, mundane things, I had a really hard time. And I finally said, what do you eat? And he said, literally red meat and potatoes.
Wow.
And I said, all right.
Okay. So we can make that happen.
Get you a lot of hamburger steak. Because he thought he was going to get a ribeye every meal.
Right.
And I was like, well, I'll get you a hamburger steak.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I usually have a ribeye. And I was like, well, that's not in this person's budget. So you'll get a hamburger steak. All of a sudden, that chicken breast didn't look so terrible.
Right.
So, and another thing that I was just shocked by, again, was doing work for a foundation. And one of their core values that they promoted and pushed forward was healthy foods, and they put their money where their mouth was. And so, I would do a seafood entree, and we always collected dietary restrictions. And so she was bold, and she let me do a beautiful salad with a salmon fillet on it for a lunch. Mm-hmm. And one of the women came to this luncheon, and she's like, well, I can't eat this. And I said, well, what's wrong with it? And she said, well, I can't eat seafood. And so I pulled her form, and I was like, well, you didn't tell me that. And she said, well, I never dreamed you'd serve seafood at a meal at a meeting. And I was like, welcome to the 21st century.
Right, exactly.
I said it laughingly and jokingly. I was like, I'm trying really hard not to serve convention chicken and stale broccoli, and kind of tried to make light of it. And I said, well, what would you like? What would make you happy? And she's like, a hamburger.
Oh, my goodness.
I said, well, let me see if the kitchen can accommodate that. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, because that's what the client would have wanted, was let's do it. But then, it's sort of like, well, she gets a hamburger. Now, the big burly guy sitting beside her with the fish salad.
Right.
He's seeing the hamburger. And right. I'm just like, and that's what's unfortunate about it. And, it was really funny because we did these type of menus for about 2 years, and finally her colleagues came to her and she said, okay, we get what you're doing. We appreciate what you're doing. You're a little too healthy with it.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay, I put some fries on the buffet. That's not a problem.
Yeah. I mean, we don't have to get rid of everything, quote unquote bad, but well, and one planner years ago, she's like, all of my people are very overweight. They like to, eat unhealthy food. And I'm like, but when they're under your care and under your budget, this is how you care for them, is providing them healthy meals, right? And,
right.
If they want to go eat something else, we can try to do something, but I mean, you don't have to get rid of the Twinkies and every single thing about it, but it is kind of hard. All right. So we are coming up on 40 minutes, or we are at 40 minutes. So I wanted to ask, two final questions, and I'm going to give you Jennifer's contact information in the chat so that you know how to reach her. So Jen, what is a best practice that you've seen that can help planners create that safe and inclusive experience with their food and beverage?
I think it's really talking with your meeting organizer, sponsor, my client, a corporate meeting planner, whoever, and as they are, even if it's somebody and you're inviting everybody, you're having a sales meeting and everybody on your commercial side has to attend the sales meeting, you still need to ask those people about their dietary needs. Mm-hmm. And ask it in a way, like for me, I kind of do, are you a vegetarian, a vegan? Are you gluten-free? Can you eat pork? Can you eat red meat? Do you have a seafood allergy? Are you halal? Are you kosher? Mm-hmm. And then I was like, do you have any other food allergies that are not listed above? And then I was like, is there anything else that I need to know about your your medical dietary restrictions? Mm-hmm. And then they fill that out openly. And then I send, you export that into a spreadsheet, and I send that to the hotel.
Yep.
Or the restaurant or the caterer or whatever. And I was like, this is what I'm working with. Let's see what we can do to really, because I don't like to bring out special plates. Right. Unless it's halal or kosher. I really don't like to bring out special plates because I just think, it's kind of like, have you ever seen somebody who you set down a vegetarian plate and the vegetarian plate is so beautiful, the three people who are getting the steak down the table from them think, I'm vegetarian.
Exactly.
If it's on the honor system.
Right.
So everybody always wants what they don't have.
Right. Yep. Oh, and I've personally experienced that. Somebody saying, why are you getting that meal and I'm not? So it does come up with a challenge. And in my Every Meal Matters masterclass that actually is kicking off again in a week, we talk about how to design those registration systems and how to do those reportings, because it's really important to give that up front. So
yeah. But you have to ask it in a way that you are not opening Pandora's box.
Right. Exactly. Yep. Okay. So my next one is, we're going to end on this is, and she also provided two resources, and I'll put those in the chat as well. But what is your favorite food and drink?
Tomatoes are my
Oh my God, I love tomatoes.
My husband gets embarrassed with me sometimes at a restaurant because I will send back the tomato. I ask them, how are the tomatoes? If it's this time of year where tomatoes can be okay, if they're, early hothouse tomatoes or early garden tomatoes, and I'll say, I don't want an orange piece of styrofoam, but I love them. I grow my own. My neighbors bring them to me. They know I'm a tomato snob. I will get cold sores from the acid sometimes on my face. It's just ridiculous, but I love them in any way, shape, or form. And my favorite beverage is preferably French champagne, but almost any dry sparkling wine.
Okay.
Because I'm a wino. I admit it, self-proclaimed. But yeah, it's fun. It makes people happy. It's celebratory. It's sparkly.
Very good.
Yeah, those are my faves.
Your faves
together.
Well, they could go to, actually more of a strawberry to put that into your sparkling is probably better than a tomato.
Yeah. But
yes.
Truly, I'm very fortunate. I really refer to myself and my husband as Billy Goats, and I enjoy cooking. And we were laughing the other day. He's like, this is really good. I did something new. And he said, did you Pinterest that one? I said, nah, I just made it up.
That's good.
I just looked at what I had and
it
sounded good together.
Okay. So Jennifer, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And the technical difficulties worked out just great because you're on the screen with me via phone. And I'm so glad this worked out. So,
well, listen, it's my pleasure. It's like I tell people, there's nothing new really in what we do. It's just everybody sharing best practices.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's and best practices to create inclusive experiences for everyone. And that goes with our food and beverage. So
absolutely.
I really, 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 really appreciate your experience and your personal knowledge of how to manage dietary needs, because it does become a challenge, and it doesn't have to be. It can be a lot of fun. So, Yep. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. This is the Eating at a
Tracy.
You're welcome, Jennifer. This has been the Eating at a Meeting podcast, but tell your friends about this podcast, Eating at a Meeting. It's found on all podcast platforms. And until the next time, stay safe and eat well. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, where every meal matters. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your food and beverage inclusion expert. Call me and let's get started right now on creating safe and inclusive food and beverage experiences for your customers, your employees, and your communities. Share the podcast with your friends and colleagues at our Eating at a Meeting Facebook page and on all podcast platforms. To learn more about me and receive valuable information, go to tracystuckrath.com. And if you'd like more information on how to feed engagement, nourish inclusion, and bolster your bottom line, then visit eatingatameeting.com.